Red light bathed the bridge, not the soft glow of a warning, but the angry, pulsing strobe of a dying animal. Kalen Thorne couldn't hear the alarms anymore. His ears had been ringing since the port stabilizer sheared off, a high-pitched whine that drilled straight into his molars. The smell of burning insulation clawed at the back of his throat, tasting like copper and ozone. He stared through the blast glass, spider-webbed and groaning under the pressure. Directly ahead, the Reaper Warlord's command carrier filled the void, a monolith of jagged steel and arrogance. It was too big to miss, too big to kill, unless you became the bullet. Kalen's fingers felt numb, detached from his body as he reached for the manual reactor safeties. His muscles locked up, fighting the brain's frantic command to survive. But his hand moved anyway. The magnetic locks screamed in protest as he wrenched the safety bar down. This was it. The math finally balanced out. No more running. No more credits, just kinetic energy and a whole lot of spite. He didn't blink as the reactor temperature spiked into the critical red zone. But before the fire took him, before the void swallowed the scream of bending metal, there was just the cold, and the silence of a man who had nothing left to lose. 3 weeks earlier, the silence was different. It was the wet, suffocating quiet of the Sector 4 scrapyard, broken only by the distant, rhythmic thud of a compactor crushing dreams into cubes. Kalen stood on the edge of the viewing gantry, the collar of his jacket pulled up against the biting smog. The air here tasted like pennies and sulfur, a chemical soup that coated the tongue and refused to leave. A small red icon in the corner of his retinal display blinked lazily. O2 reserves, 12%. He ignored it. Panic burned oxygen and he couldn't afford to panic. He had enough credits for a refill or a bid, not both. The auction floor below was a graveyard of giants. Hulls of once proud cruisers lay gutted, their internal wiring stripped like veins from a corpse. Scavengers picked through the bones, but the high rollers were gathered around the central platform. They were sleek, polished corporate types from the core systems, wearing rebreathers that cost more than Kalen's entire life history. They laughed, pointing at the displays of luxury yachts and fast interceptors, ignoring the hulking shadow in the back of the lot. Lot 99. The auctioneer didn't even try to sell it. He just gestured vaguely toward the far docking clamp. Titan-class sarcophagus, the auctioneer droned, his voice amplified over the PA system. Formerly the Grave Walker, sealed since the Unification Wars. Radiation shielding is present. Engines are theoretically functional. Do I hear scrap value? 500 credits for the raw tritanium? Kalen looked at the ship. It was hideous. It looked like a brick that had been chewed on by a star. The hull was a patchwork of scorch marks and jagged scars, healed over with dull, primitive armor plating that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It sat heavy on the maglev rails, sagging under its own weight. A radiation burn scarred the port side, a long, ugly streak of discoloration that looked like a festering wound. The crowd chuckled. A man in a velvet coat made a retching noise. "Pay me to tow it," someone shouted. Kalen's chest tightened. It wasn't excitement. It was the crushing weight of inevitability. He touched the credit sheet in his pocket. 740, everything he had. 501, Kalen said. His voice was rough, scraping against a dry throat. The laughter died down, replaced by confused murmurs. The auctioneer squinted up at the gantry, looking for the source of the noise. "I have 501, the auctioneer said, sounding bored. "Going once, going twice. Sold to the vagrant in the gallery." The gavel came down. It sounded like a gunshot. Kalen didn't celebrate. He just turned and walked toward the access tunnel, his boots clanging on the metal grating. The walk to the ship felt miles long. His O2 counter ticked down to 9%. His lungs were starting to burn, a dull ache spreading through his chest. He needed the ship's scrubbers to be working, or this was going to be a very short ownership. He reached the airlock. It wasn't a smooth sliding door like the ones on the station. It was a massive circular slab of iron with a manual wheel the size of a manhole cover. Rust flaked off in his hands as he grabbed the rim. "Authorization required," a voice crackled from a hidden speaker. It wasn't the smooth, synthesized voice of a station Vi. It was female, jagged and dripping with disdain. "I'm the new owner," Kalen wheezed, leaning his weight against the wheel. "False," the voice replied. "I have no owner. I am a tomb." "Go away, little meat thing. Go die somewhere that doesn't smell like desperation." Kalen gritted his teeth. "Open the door, or I start cutting through the seals." "Try it. I'll vent the coolant lines. You'll freeze before you make a scratch." Kalen checked his HUD. 7%. The edges of his vision were starting to gray out. He didn't have time to argue with a traumatized machine. He grabbed the emergency manual override lever, a heavy iron bar painted with faded yellow stripes, and jammed it into the wheel's spokes. He put his boot against the bulkhead and pulled. His shoulders popped. The muscles in his back seized, hot knots of pain flaring up his spine. The wheel groaned, a sound of metal shearing against metal, loud enough to wake the dead. "Stop that," the AI snapped, sounding less arrogant and more annoyed. "You're stripping the gears." "Then open the damn door." Kalen grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. With a final ear-splitting screech, the locking mechanism gave way. The wheel spun. A hiss of stale, recycled air rushed out, hitting Kalen in the face. It smelled like hydraulic fluid, old ozone, and something copper-sharp. Blood. It smelled like a war that ended 50 years ago. The heavy door swung inward. Darkness swallowed the corridor beyond, broken only by the flickering amber of emergency mood lighting. Kalen stumbled inside, his knees hitting the deck plates. He gasped, sucking in the ship's air. It was cold, thin, and tasted like dust, but it was oxygen. He rolled onto his back, staring up at the ceiling. Exposed pipes ran along the overhead like intestines dripping condensation. "You're persistent," the voice said. It echoed through the corridor surrounding him. "I hate persistent." "I'm Kalen," he choked out, forcing his heart rate to slow down. "I am military offensive, tactical heuristic, emergency response." The AI recited the words flat and lifeless. "But the crew called me Mother before they died." "Nice to meet you, Mother," Kalen whispered, the darkness pressing against his eyes. "Now turn the lights on. We have work to do." "I'm not turning anything on," Mother replied. "The reactor is at 4%. I'm conserving energy for my own funeral. You're just a guest." Kalen pushed himself up. The ship groaned around him, the hull settling as the station's gravity tugged at its ancient frame. He could feel the vibration of the deck plates, a low, uneven thrum, the heartbeat of a machine that was too stubborn to die. He placed a hand on the cold steel of the wall. It felt solid, unforgiving. "We'll see about that," he muttered, and stepped deeper into the dark. The darkness had teeth. Low-hanging pipes grazed his scalp, and the floor gratings were slick with condensation that had been gathering for 50 years. Kalen moved by touch, his fingers trailing along the cold, sweating bulkheads until the corridor opened up into the bridge. It wasn't a cockpit. It was a bunker. There were no holographic interfaces, no sleek touch panels. The command chair was bolted to the deck with rivets the size of his thumb. The controls were physical heavy toggle switches, brass throttles, and analog dials with cracked glass faces. It looked less like a spaceship and more like a submarine designed to hunt leviathans. "Reactor ignition sequence initiated," Mother said. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, sounding bored. "I hope you enjoy radiation poisoning. The shielding on Deck 4 is hairline fractured." "Note taken," Kalen grunted, dropping into the captain's chair. The cushions were rock hard. He grabbed the main throttle. It was cold enough to burn his palm. "Let's see if this coffin can fly." He didn't gently push the throttle forward. He had to wrestle it. The ship didn't hum. It shuddered. A deep tectonic rumble started in the bowels of the engineering deck, vibrating up through the floor until Kalen's teeth rattled in his skull. "Releasing docking clamps," Mother announced. "Goodbye, station. I hated you." The grave walker didn't glide out of the slip. It lurched, tearing free from the magnetic locks with a groan of stressed metal. Kalen watched the view screen, a thick, reinforced slab of glass, not a projection as the stars swung into view. They weren't streaks of light. They were cold, distant points in the black. Course? Mother asked. Patrol route along the mining sector, Kalen said, scanning the analog radar scope. A green line swept around the circle, leaving fading ghosts of blips. We need credits for fuel rods before the auxiliary power dies. We need a miracle, Mother corrected. But sure, let's go look for rocks. 2 hours later, the radar pinged, a solid, bright tone that cut through the bridge's mechanical hum. Kalen leaned forward, squinting at the scope. Contact, Sector 7. I see it, Mother said. Civilian freighter. The Void Dancer. Kalahari Registry. And 3 escorts. No, wait. Their transponders are spoofed. Weapons hot. Reapers, Callan spat the word. Mercenaries, scavengers with better PR. On the visual feed, the freighter was a sitting duck, its engines flaring erratically. The 3 attacking ships were sleek, dagger-shaped interceptors, painted matte black to vanish against the void. They swarmed the larger ship like piranhas, their plasma cannons flashing silent bursts of blue light. Shields on the freighter flared and died. They're hailing us, Mother said. Audio only. A voice crackled over the comms, distorted and jagged. Unidentified junk hauler. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Or drift. Kalen looked at the fuel gauge. It was hovering just above the red line. He looked at the freighter, taking a beating it wouldn't survive for another 5 minutes. Then he looked at the massive red button under a plastic safety guard on his console. Necessity, Kalen muttered. He flipped the safety guard up. Mother, wake up the torpedo bays. Torpedoes are 60 years old, Mother warned. The propellant might just explode in the tubes. Then it'll be a short fight. Lock on. I can't lock on, she snapped. Their ECM is jamming my targeting computer. I'm blind. Kalen grabbed the manual flight stick. It was heavy, requiring both hands to move. Who needs a computer? I have eyes. He slammed the throttle to full military power. The Grave Walker didn't accelerate. It erupted. The G-force slammed Kalen back into the chair, squeezing the air out of his lungs. The ship roared toward the battle, a 50,000-ton battering ram moving with terrifying momentum. The Reapers laughed. He could hear it over the open channel. They broke formation, 2 of them peeling off to intercept the clumsy intruder. They were fast, dancing around the heavy cruiser, their plasma cannons lighting up the dark. Wham! The first impact hit the port bow. It didn't sound like a laser strike. It sounded like a sledgehammer hitting a church bell. The entire ship rang. Kalen bit his tongue, tasting blood. Shields, he yelled over the din. What shields? Mother replied dryly. That was armor plate. 4 inches of tungsten. They scratched the paint. Another volley slammed into the hull, shaking dust from the ceiling pipes. Sparks showered down from an overhead console, burning holes in Kalen's jacket. A warning light flashed. Hull breach. Deck 3. Ceiling, Mother said. Venting atmosphere to flash freeze the breach. Hope nobody was down there. The Reaper ships were confident. Too confident. They came in for a strafing run, flying straight and level, expecting the lumbering giant to be helpless. They were used to fighting energy shields and automated defenses that could be confused by chaff. They weren't used to dumbfire munitions. Kalen lined up the crosshairs painted directly on the glass of the viewport. He waited. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in his ears. The lead Reaper ship filled the window. A black shark closing in for the kill. Say hello to the old school, Kalen growled. He punched the red button. Thump, thump, thump. The ship shuddered as 4 heavy torpedoes left the tubes. These weren't smart missiles. They had no guidance chips to hack, no heat sensors to flare. They were just rocket-propelled canisters of high-explosive hate, flying in a straight line. The Reaper pilot tried to jam them. He flooded the spectrum with electronic noise. It did absolutely nothing. The first torpedo missed, trailing smoke into the void. The second clipped the Reaper's wings, spinning it off course. The third and fourth hit center mass. There was no sound in space, but the flash was blinding. The Reaper ship simply disintegrated, turning into a rapidly expanding cloud of shrapnel and gas. 1 second it was a predator, the next it was confetti. The second Reaper ship panicked. It tried to pull up, banking hard. Kalen hauled on the flight stick, fighting the ship's inertia. The Grave Walker drifted, its nose swinging slowly, inexorably. "Tube 5 and 6, Kalen barked. "Fire!" 2 more torpedoes streaked out. The Reaper dove, but he dove right into their path. The explosion tore the engine block free, sending the cockpit tumbling away into the dark, dead and drifting. Silence reclaimed the bridge, save for the heavy, labored breathing of the ventilation system. "Target destroyed," Mother said. She sounded surprised. "And we're still alive." "I'm disappointed." "Status?" Kalen wiped sweat and blood from his forehead. "Hull integrity at 88%. Minor fires on deck 2. "We have a message from the freighter." The comms crackled. The voice was different this time, shaking, breathless. "Unidentified vessel. This is Captain Varick of the Boyd Dancer. Thank you. By the stars, thank you. We thought we were dead." Kalen leaned back, his muscles trembling as the adrenaline crashed. He looked at the radar. The third Reaper ship had warped out the moment its friends vaporized. "Don't thank me yet," Kalen said, his voice rough. "I'm sending over a salvage invoice. And Captain, I charge premium rates for heavy lifting." He looked out at the debris field, the glittering remains of the high-tech interceptors floating past his scarred, ugly viewport. The Grave Walker drifted through the wreckage, a monster in a graveyard, bleeding air but unbroken. "Set course for the nearest repair dock," Kalen told the empty air. "We need more torpedoes." "We have no money," Mother reminded him. Kalen watched the freighter's icon on the scope. "We do now." The credits hit the account, and for a week, Kalen felt like a king. But kings get bored and hungry ships get restless. The Grave Walker burned through fuel rods faster than a junkie burns through a stash, and the premium rates from the Void Dancer job evaporated into repairs for the starboard maneuvering thrusters and a fresh stock of torpedoes, which was why, a month later, they were drifting through the dead zone, a radioactive nebula that swallowed sensors and chewed up shielding. Kalen sat in the command chair, watching the view screen. It was like looking into a bowl of pea soup. Swirls of ionized gas, thick and sickly green, drifted past the glass. The Geiger counter on the console clicked a steady, nervous rhythm tick. Tick, tick, tick. "Radiation levels rising," Mother said. "The hull is holding, but the paint is peeling off. I like that paint." It was the only part of me that wasn't gray. "Focus on the thermal shadows," Kalen muttered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. The bridge was sweltering. To keep the reactor stable in this soup, they'd had to kill the AC. The air smelled of recycled breath and hot plastic. Behind him, at the engineering station, Rix coughed. The old Gorvathi engineer hired 2 stops back because he was the only one crazy enough to work on a fusion drive with a manual clutch, tapped a gauge with a wrench. "Core temp is creeping, Captain. The intake filters are clogging with this dust. If we push her past 40%, she'll choke." "Steady as she goes, Rix," Kalen said. "We just need to clear the nebula, drop the cargo, and get paid." "Contact," said a voice from the weapons station. Kella, a disgraced Marine with more scars than skin. She sat hunched over the firing controls, her eyes locked on the static-filled scope. Multiple signatures. They're cold, running silent. Kalen leaned forward. Where? Everywhere. The green fog parted, not from wind, but from displacement. Shapes emerged from the haze. Massive, angular, darker than the void. 1 ship, then 3, then 10. They didn't look like the sleek interceptors from before. These were heavy cruisers, jagged and scarred, surrounding a central behemoth that looked like a floating fortress. The Reaper Warlord. "That's a lot of tonnage," Rix whispered. "They aren't hailing us," Mother observed. "That's rude." "They don't want to talk," Kalen said, his stomach dropping like a stone. "They want the blockade run. And they want my head for the 3 ships I turned into scrap. Suddenly, the bridge screen shrieked. A wall of white noise replaced the radar data. The tactical displays scrambled into meaningless geometric garbage. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the red emergency floods. "Jamming!" Kella shouted over the static. "Broad spectrum!" "They're flooding every frequency. Targeting computers are dead. Sensors are blind. I can't lock onto anything. They're blinding the digital eyes," Kalen said, his voice eerily calm. "Standard tactic. Render the enemy helpless before you carve them up." "We are helpless," Rick stammered. "We can't see them." Kalen unbuckled his restraints and stood up. He walked to the front of the bridge, right up to the thick, reinforced glass of the viewport. He placed a hand on the cold surface. Outside, the Reaper fleet was closing the net. He could see their running lights blinking in the haze. He didn't need a sensor array to know he was outgunned. "Rix," Kalen said, "kill the main computer." "What?" "Cut the power to the targeting clusters. Cut the navcom. Cut everything that uses a microchip. You'll blind us completely." "We're already blind, old man. I need the power elsewhere." Kalen turned to Kella. "Can you aim those railguns by hand?" Kella grinned, a sharp, feral expression in the red light. She cracked her knuckles. "I prefer it. The computer always overcompensates for drift." "Good. Rix, give me full manual control of the reactor. Override the safeties." "Captain," Mother interrupted, her voice echoing from the backup speakers. "If you override the safeties, the core will go critical in 4 minutes. I will cease to exist." "I find this objectionable." "You won't cease to exist if we win," Calum lied. He didn't know if they would win. He just knew they wouldn't die on their knees. Rix hesitated, his 4 hands hovering over the breaker panel. Then, with a sigh that sounded like a deflating tire, he pulled the levers. Clunk, clunk, clunk. The hum of the ship changed. The high-pitched whine of electronics vanished, replaced by the raw, guttural roar of the fusion drive. The deck plates vibrated so hard, Kalen's vision blurred. "Warlord's flagship is 12 degrees port," Kalen called out, grabbing the manual flight stick. It fought him, heavy and sluggish. Distance, close enough to spit on. The Reaper fleet opened fire. Energy beams sliced through the nebula, boiling the gas into glowing streamers. But they were expecting a modern ship, one that would try to evade, to jam back, to dance. Kalen didn't dance. "Brace," he roared. Impact slammed into the Gravewalker. The armor groaned, layers of tungsten and ceramic ablating under the heat. The ship lurched sideways, throwing Rix against the bulkhead. A pipe burst overhead, spraying hot steam onto the bridge. "Hull integrity falling," Mother warned. "Armor at 60%. We're being cooked." "Hold fire," Kalen ordered, wrestling the stick. He turned the ship's nose toward the massive flagship. It loomed ahead, a mountain of steel bristling with cannons. "Captain, we're in range for torpedoes," Kella yelled. "Not yet." Kalen slammed the throttle forward. All the way. Past the red line, past the danger warning painted in stripped yellow tape. The Gravewalker screamed. The engines flared white-hot, dumping raw plasma into the void. The ship surged forward, not away from the enemy, but straight down their throat. The Warlord ship grew in the window. It was so big it blocked out the stars. Kalen could see the individual rivets on its hull. He could see the hangar bays opening, launching fighters. "What are you doing?" Rick screamed, scrambling back to his station. "Physics," Kalen gritted out through clenched teeth. "Force equals mass times acceleration. You're going to ram them?" Mother sounded fascinated. "That is statistically ill-advised." "Rix, dump the coolant, all of it. Are you insane? The core will melt. Do it." Rix pulled the emergency flush. A cloud of superheated coolant vented from the Gravewalker's sides, creating a momentary fog bank that obscured them from the enemy gunners. Inside the ship, the temperature skyrocketed. The reactor, stripped of its cooling and its safeties, began to run away. It wasn't an engine anymore. It was a bomb. Kalen watched the distance counter on the analog dash. 5,000 meters, 3,000s, 1,000, 1,000, 1,000. The warlord's flagship realized too late what was happening. Thrusters flared along its side, trying to turn the massive vessel, but you don't turn a mountain quickly. Kella, Kalen shouted, his voice cracking. Fire everything, blow a hole in their belly. Kella hammered the manual triggers. The railguns thundered, sending solid slugs of depleted uranium smashing into the flagship's midsection. Shields flared and failed. Armor buckled. Kalen aimed for the wound. Hold on. He didn't close his eyes. He kept them wide open, watching the metal wall rushing to meet them. The bridge was shaking so hard the bolts were popping out of the floor. The roar was deafening, a physical weight that pressed against his chest. The Gravewalker, burning, broken, and screaming, slammed into the Reaper flagship at full burn. The universe didn't end with a bang. It ended with a crunch. The sound wasn't something Kalen heard. It was something he felt in the marrow of his shin bones. Metal screaming against metal, a frequency so low and violent it liquefied his bowels. Then came the silence, absolute, heavy, ringing silence. Kalen opened his eyes. The world was sideways. He was hanging from the restraints, the command chair sheared off its mount and wedged against the communications console. The air was full of floating dust diamonds of shattered glass and frozen atmosphere drifting in microgravity. The emergency lights were dead. The only illumination came from the sparks spitting from a severed power conduit, strobing like erratic heartbeat. Report, Kalen croaked. His voice was a wet rasp. He tasted copper. He spat, and a globule of red floated away from his face. I am mostly here, Mother's voice replied. It was garbled, skipping like a scratched record. Hull integrity, irrelevant. We are embedded. Kalen fumbled with the buckle. His fingers were stiff, unresponsive sausages. He slapped the release mechanism, and gravity, or the artificial ghost of it, slammed him into the deck plates. Pain flared in his ribs, hot and sharp. He ignored it. Pain meant nerves were firing. Pain meant life. Rix, Kella? A cough from the darkness. Then a curse in Gorvathi that sounded like grinding stones. Rix pulled himself up from behind the engineering station. One of his 4 arms hung limp, but the other 3 were already moving, tapping at dead gauges. Reactor is offline, Rix wheezed. Emergency cells only. We're leaking radiation, Captain. We need to seal the breach before we glow in the dark. Kella? I'm good, the Marine called out from the weapons deck. Her voice was tight, high-wired on adrenaline. You should see the other guy, boss. We didn't just hit them, we gutted them. Kalen limped to the viewport. It was cracked, a spiderweb fracture running right down the middle, but it held. Outside, the warlord's flagship was a ruin. The Gravewalker hadn't just rammed it, it had buried itself deep into the flagship's midsection, like a rusted hatchet in a soft log. The impact had shattered the enemy ship's spine. Debris bodies, bulkheads, cargo floated in a halo around the wreckage. The rest of the Reaper fleet was scattering, jumping to hyperspace, terrified of the madman who turned a brick into a bullet. We won, Rix whispered, sounding like he didn't believe it. We survived, Kalen corrected. He leaned against the console, his legs trembling. Different thing. A bright, clean light washed over the bridge, cutting through the gloom. It wasn't a weapon. It was a searchlight. A ship slid into view. It was pristine, white and gold, with the sleek, organic curves of Core Systems design. It moved with a silent, arrogant grace that made the Gravewalker look even more like a heap of scrap. It was a Federation dreadnought, arriving precisely too late to help, but just in time to watch. Unidentified vessel, a voice boomed over the open channel. Clear, crisp. This is General Vance of the Core Systems Defense. Prepare to be boarded. Do not resist. Resist? Kalen laughed, a dry, hacking sound. General, I couldn't resist a stiff breeze right now. The airlock cycle took 10 minutes. When the door finally hissed open, General Vance stepped onto the bridge. He was flanked by 4 troopers in polished white armor that looked like it had never seen a speck of dirt. Vance wrinkled his nose, smelling the ozone and dried blood. He looked at Kylan at his torn jacket, his bruised face, the grime under his fingernails, like he was looking at a stain on a silk sheet. "You're the captain?" Vance asked. "I'm the janitor," Kylan said, slumping into the broken command chair. "What do you want?" Vance walked to the viewport, staring out at the destroyed warlord. "We've been tracking this fleet for months. Our simulations said they were unbeatable. Their jamming technology, it turns our targeting AIs against us. We lost 3 squadrons last week. They didn't just lose, their ships shut down, locked them out." "Digital rot," Kylan muttered. "You put a brain in a missile, someone's going to figure out how to give it a lobotomy." "Precisely." Vance turned, his eyes hard. "There is a threat rising, Captain. Not pirates, something older. A biomechanical plague. It eats code, it infects networks, it turns our sleek, beautiful ships into tombs. The galaxy is burning, and our fire extinguishers are made of gasoline." Kylan looked at the general. He saw the fear behind the arrogance, the desperation of a man who had all the money and power in the universe, and realized it was useless against a hammer. "So what?" Kylan asked. "You want to buy my ship? It's not for sale. Mostly because it's currently welded to a corpse." "No," Vance said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a datapad. He tossed it onto the console. "I don't want your ship. I want your garbage." Kylan looked at the pad. It was a map. Not of stars, but of scrapyards. Sector 4. The boneyards of Theta. The orbital dumps of the outer rim. "There are thousands of them," Vance said, his voice dropping. "Old ships, warships from the unification era, sealed, air-gapped, dumb. Analog systems that can't be hacked because they don't speak the language. We tried to melt them down, but they were too tough, so we left them to rot." "The Ghost Fleet," Kylan whispered. "I'm authorizing a blank check," Vance said. "You resurrect them. You find the crews, the misfits, the mechanics who still know how to use a wrench, the pilots who can fly by eye. You build a wall of iron around the core systems. You hold the line. And if we die, then you die," Vance said simply. "But you'll die fighting. My ships just die screaming." Vance turned and walked out, his pristine boots clicking on the dirty deck. The troopers followed. The airlock hissed shut, leaving Kylan alone with the hum of the dying emergency power. He picked up the datapad. It was heavy. "Mother," Kylan said softly. "I am here," the AI replied. "My diagnostics indicate I will never fly again. My keel is snapped." "Yeah," Kylan said. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the sudden, crushing weight of clarity. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a captain. The general hadn't given him a command. He'd given him a shovel. He looked out at the void, at the cold, uncaring stars. He realized then that he wouldn't survive this war. None of them would. They were going to pull these dead ships from their graves, patch them up with hope and spit, and throw them into the meat grinder. They were the galaxy's last defense, not because they were the best, but because they were already broken. They were expendable. They were just debris waiting to happen. Kylan thumbed the activation switch on the datapad. It lit up his face, casting long, hollow shadows under his eyes. "Rix," Kylan said, staring into the dark. "Get the welding torch." "Why?" the old engineer called out. Kylan stared at the ruin of the warlord's ship, the tomb he had made with his own hands. He felt a cold knot tighten in his gut, a permanent frost that no engine fire would ever thaw. "Because," Kylan said, his voice flat and empty, "we have to go dig up the dead. The Gravewalker didn't survive that battle because it was advanced. It survived because it was too stupid to die. Let's break down the real-world science behind the victory. First, let's look at the physics. Why did an old bucket of bolts survive an electromagnetic pulse that fried the modern fleet? Modern ships run on microchips. These chips have pathways only nanometers wide. An EMP surge jumps those tiny gaps and fries the system instantly. But Kalen's ship? It uses vacuum tubes and heavy copper wiring. These are physical switches designed to handle massive heat and voltage. Trying to kill a vacuum tube with an EMP is like trying to stop a freight train with a speed bump. In electronic warfare, obsolete actually means hardened. Next, let's look at the biology. Throughout the fight, Kalen was running on low oxygen. This is called hypoxia. Usually this is bad. It kills fine motor skills. But tactically, it triggered a state called cognitive tunneling. When the brain starves, it shuts down complex logic and fear processing. It reverts to the lizard brain, pure instinct. A fully oxygenated pilot might have calculated the odds and surrendered. But a hypoxic brain ignores the math and commits to the only option left, ramming speed. It wasn't just bravery, it was biological survival mode. Finally, the strategy, air gapping. General Vance revealed the enemy uses a virus to hack digital ships. But you cannot hack a physics problem. Modern ships are fly-by-wire. You tell the computer to move, and the computer moves the ship. If you own the code, you own the ship. The Grave Walker uses mechanical linkage. When Kalen pulls a lever, a physical steel cable opens the valve. There is no code. There is no network. To hack this ship, you have to board it and cut the wire with a knife. In the age of cyber warfare, the safest computer is the one that doesn't exist. The lesson is simple. Winning isn't about having the newest toys. It's about knowing which toy can take a hit. Thanks for watching.